Hi, I'm Kaya. Last week my parents looked me dead in the eyes and said they regretted having me, not because I did anything wrong, but because I wasn't their golden daughter. For 28 years I tried to matter. I gave them my savings. I stood in the background. I let them erase me piece by piece. Then they found my journal, the one I never meant for anyone to read, and for the first time, they broke. But the damage? It was already done. Before we go any further, tell me, what time is it where you are? And where are you listening from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. They say spring softens everything, the sunlight, the wind, the way people speak. But nothing about that Saturday morning felt soft. I parked a little ways down the street. The Brenner house hadn't changed. Blue shutters, a porch swing that hadn't swung in years, and a maple tree I used to climb when I was small enough to be noticed. I balanced the warm scones in one hand and adjusted the scarf around my neck. The scarf was soft green wool, frayed just slightly at the edges. Mom gave it to me 5 years ago, her version of an apology without ever saying the word. Inside, everything smelled like butter and cinnamon. I could hear Celine's voice before I saw her, bright, clipped, and performing for her audience as always. She greeted me with a distracted, "Hey," then turned back to their mother, her wine glass already in hand. Dad was at the head of the table, reading the news off his tablet like it was a boardroom briefing. No one stood up. No one offered to take the scones. I found a spot at the far end and quietly slid them onto the table. "Blueberry," I offered, hoping to break the stiffness. Dad's favorite. No response. Celine continued detailing her firm's expansion into Portland, and Dad nodded occasionally, the way men do when they're not really listening, but don't want to admit it. I waited for a natural pause to share my news. My solo exhibit at the gallery downtown had drawn over 200 guests, even a write-up in the Tribune. "So I had my opening last Friday." Celine raised her hand mid-sentence. Wait, Dad, tell them about that investor who wants you to speak at the Rotary. He sounded huge." He leaned back, folding his arms. Yeah, he's a good kid. Reminds me of someone who listens." I closed my mouth. The scones were cooling. "I just thought it was nice." I tried again, voice quieter. The exhibit. A lot of people showed up. Silence. Mom finally glanced over. "Kaya, you've always been, how do I say it? So performative, even as a kid. You don't need a crowd to be proud of yourself, sweetie." Performative. I bit the inside of my cheek, willing my smile to hold. I watched her sip her tea like she hadn't just taken a scalpel to my ribs. Then Dad said it. "You know, if we're honest, we shouldn't have had a third child. It was too much. We weren't ready. That's not your fault, but it changed everything." His voice was calm, practiced, like he'd said this to himself before, like this was a business decision, finally finalized. I blinked, waiting for Celine to laugh and call him ridiculous. She didn't. Mom didn't flinch either. She just folded her napkin and said, "We said we regret it. That doesn't mean we don't love you. Don't twist things." I sat still for a beat too long. My coffee had gone cold, my face hot. "Did you really just say that out loud?" "You always overreact," Celine muttered without looking at me. I stood slowly. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "I need some air." The hallway was dim but familiar. My feet took me toward the photo wall out of instinct. I hadn't looked at it in a long time. I wish I hadn't now. There were new frames. Celine's wedding in Vermont, her husband holding their son, Mom and Dad at some lakeside anniversary dinner. Even childhood photos of Celine and Evan, our brother, grinning at some long-ago science fair. Not one of me. Even the photo from my graduation, the one with my cap crooked and Dad's arm around my shoulder, was gone. I stepped closer. There was a square of clean space where it used to hang, a paler patch surrounded by faint dust, like a missing tooth in a smile. That's when my knees buckled a little. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. My throat felt like cotton. My eyes stung, but I wouldn't give them tears. I walked back to the front hallway, picked up my bag, and opened the front door. The air outside was crisp, but it didn't sting as much as the silence inside had. Standing on the porch, I whispered aloud, just to myself. "They don't regret having me. They just regret that I didn't become who they wanted." I didn't remember the walk back to my apartment. I think I crossed 4 intersections without really seeing the lights change. By the time I stepped through my front door, the blueberry scones I had baked were still warm in the tote, untouched, their buttery sweetness now bitter on my tongue without even taking a bite. The air in the apartment felt heavier than usual, like grief had moved in while I was gone. I didn't collapse on the couch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I hung up my scarf, the one Mom had given me 5 years ago, and stood there staring at the empty hook beside it. My keys dangled quietly. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I moved slowly to my dresser. The bottom drawer held years of tucked-away memories I rarely touched, scraps of the past I once clung to, then buried. I pulled it open and sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, the city hum whispering through the window behind me. My fingers brushed over an old birthday card. I hesitated, then set it aside. And that's when it hit me. I was 9 again, standing just outside the kitchen door, half hidden behind the floral curtain. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was going to ask Mom if I could open my second gift early. But her voice cut through first. "We should have stopped it too," she said, quietly but clearly. "I don't have it in me to keep faking." Dad's voice came next. "Too late now. She's here. Just try not to let her feel it." I hadn't remembered that moment in years. Maybe I had blocked it out. Maybe it had always been there, buried beneath school plays and whispered apologies that never really came. But now it played like a film on loop. That night I had smiled through the cake cutting, posed for pictures with frosting on my cheek, thanked them for the party like the good girl I always tried to be. They didn't know I heard. Or maybe they didn't care. Present-day Kaya reached into the drawer again, pulling out the card from that year. Plain cream cardstock, their signatures at the bottom, nothing else, not even happy birthday. Just love, Mom and Dad. My breath caught. I flipped it over. Nothing. Celine's card that same year, her 11th, was still vivid in my mind. It had flowers drawn in red and purple ink, and Mom had written a full letter on the inside. 2 pages. She read it aloud at dinner. Something about how Celine was a blessing, so bright, and the heart of this family. Even back then, I had smiled through that too. I should have burned this card years ago. Instead, I tucked it back into the drawer like it hadn't just ripped a hole in me. All my life, I'd played the role. The easy one. The helper. The daughter who didn't complain, who didn't ask for much. I kept the peace. I never skipped school, never rebelled. When I got straight A's, I posted the report card on the fridge myself because no one else did. When I won that regional art contest in high school, I told Mom it was fine she missed the awards night. "You had a work dinner," I reminded her, even though she hadn't. She'd smiled, barely. "You're sensitive, Kaya. Don't take things so personally." But it wasn't personal, was it? It was just invisible. I opened my old diary. The pages were worn, the edges frayed. My handwriting was looped and neat, a child desperate to be understood. I flipped through until one line caught my eye, written in purple ink. "Someday I'll matter enough for them to regret nothing." My throat tightened. I whispered, "Guess that someday never came." 2 days passed like fog, thick and motionless. I barely left my apartment, and when I did, it was for coffee I didn't finish or errands I didn't remember starting. Sunday morning arrived with a text I had already expected. "Sunday brunch. Milas booked a private room. Be there." "Mom?" No hi, no apology, just a command dressed as a courtesy. I stared at the screen, rereading the words until they blurred. Nora, always the grounding voice, didn't even look up from her crossword when I told her. "Don't go," she muttered. "You already know what's waiting." I buttoned my coat. I need to know if they're really going to pretend like none of it happened. The cafe in Adina was the kind of place you went when you wanted to show people you had your life together. White tablecloths, fresh peonies in small vases, soft jazz humming from the speakers. I arrived early, out of habit, clutching the same leather tote I had taken to the last brunch. A hostess smiled and walked me past the main room to a private area near the back. I paused when I saw the setup. A long table was set for 10, beautifully decorated, already buzzing with polite laughter. And next to it, Closer to the children's play corner was a small table set for two. "Excuse me," I said, pointing. "I'm with the Brenner party." She checked her tablet. "Yes, Kaya, right? You're listed for the small table." My jaw tightened. "That one?" She nodded. "Yes, ma'am, right here." The chair screeched as I pulled it out. I sat, feeling every inch of distance between me and them. The noise of toddlers banging spoons behind me was the only thing drowning out the ringing in my ears. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the untouched cutlery. Eventually, my father stood and tapped a glass. "Glad everyone could make it. Let's eat and enjoy." And then my mother rose. Her smile was soft but deliberate. She lifted her glass and said, "Here's to Celine's promotion, regional director finally, and to Melis's engagement. We couldn't be prouder. Truly, you two are the joy of our lives." Cheers, clapping, even some awes from the cousins. I lifted my mimosa, sipped slowly, and stared straight ahead. There were 10 names on that table. Mine wasn't spoken. When dessert was served, I excused myself to the restroom. The mirror was too clean, too bright. I barely recognized the woman staring back. "Even here," I whispered, "they need me to vanish for everything to look perfect." I fished out my phone. One word to Nora, confirming. She'd know exactly what it meant. I returned quietly, hoping to slide back in without much notice. But Celine leaned over just as I reached my chair. Her perfume was sharp, her smile sharper. "You know they only invited you so you wouldn't make a scene, right?" I didn't flinch. Maybe they should have let me stay invisible. The ride home blurred through my windshield, trees sliding past like ghost limbs. I didn't even turn on the radio. Just silence, the kind that buzzes at the edges of your thoughts. Back in my apartment, I didn't take off my coat right away. I just stood in the middle of my living room, the air stale and still, as if even the walls were holding their breath. My scarf still smelled faintly like the brunch cafe, syrup and disinfectant. I moved toward the mirror in the hallway, catching my reflection under the yellow ceiling light. Same blouse, same face, same Kaya who'd sat near the toddler corner. I slipped off my shoes one at a time, slowly, like I was peeling off skin that didn't belong to me. I tossed my phone on the couch, then paused. It buzzed with a new notification. An email. I pulled it up, ready to ignore it, but then I saw the subject line. Updated trust structure Carver Family Holdings. The sender was a law firm we'd used during the Lake Eden estate fiasco years ago. I knew that name. I opened the email. No greeting, no explanation, just a bulleted summary of updates to the trust. My name wasn't anywhere in it. A small note caught my eye. Celine Carver to serve as sole trustee and inheritor of the Lake Eden estate. I sat down hard on the edge of the couch, eyes glued to the screen. I felt something rise in my throat, like acid, like air sucked out too fast. I blinked, twice, hoping the words would shift. They didn't. I reached for the side drawer where I kept an old box labeled Lake Eden. I hadn't touched it in years. I pulled out a folded diary page from 2014. I gave them what I had. All I asked was to belong. The memory hit me like winter wind through an open door. It was after the storm, when Mom called crying, saying the cabin might be foreclosed if we didn't cover taxes and legal fees. I'd been 26, just starting to sell paintings at pop-up markets. I'd transferred $43,000 from my savings without hesitation. I remembered the hug, tight, trembling. Her whisper, "You'll always have a home there." What a lie. Or maybe a script. Something she said to calm her conscience. I grabbed my phone and called Dad. I didn't rehearse it. I didn't need to. He picked up. "Hello? When were you planning to tell me about the trust update?" I asked, voice flat. He hesitated. "Kaya, it's complicated. You've been a bit distant." I heard Celine in the background, her voice sharper, irritated. "Just tell her it's finalized. She wouldn't understand anyway." I hung up. No goodbyes. I didn't cry, not this time. I just stared at the floor, then stood up and grabbed my keys. The night air outside smelled of early spring, wet bark, and leftover snow. I drove straight to my storage unit on Hennepin, barely noticing the way my hands gripped the wheel. Inside the dim fluorescent light, I found the plastic bin marked Tax Property Old. I dug until I found a manila envelope with faded marker, Lake Eden receipts and title transfer notes. I held it in my hands, palms sweating, heart thudding with something deeper than rage. If they want war, I whispered, they forgot who helped build their fort. I didn't sleep that night. After pulling out the envelope from storage, I just sat in my kitchen, the old laminate floor chilled under my bare feet. The moonlight from the small window cut across the room, tracing the edges of the papers I hadn't dared to unfold in years. I told myself I'd wait until morning, but my hand had a mind of its own. The coffee I poured at sunrise had long since gone cold. Still, I held the mug like it could warm more than just my hands. I stared at the yellowed envelope again. Lake Eden, receipts, and title transfer notes. My handwriting, back when I still thought love meant something in ink. I tried to write it out in my journal. Something, anything, but all I could muster was one line. I want to stop existing where I'm not welcome. The words just hung there, silent, like the rest of the apartment. By mid-morning, I finally dialed a number I hadn't called in over a decade. Mr. Halverson, my late uncle's friend. A quiet man, always more patient than necessary. When his voice came through the receiver, I braced myself for formality. Mr. Halverson? This is Kaya Carver. I'm not sure if you remember. Kaya, he said gently. Of course I remember. Your uncle adored you. I closed my eyes. I was wondering, do you still have the contribution letter I signed for the Lake Eden property? Back in 2012? He paused, long enough that I thought the call dropped. Then he sighed. Let me check the archive. I waited. The silence on the line made me feel like a kid again, waiting to see if someone would show up for the school recital. Finally, he returned. I have it, he said. Dated March 4th, 2012. States you contributed $43,000 toward the purchase of the Lake Eden cabin. It's notarized. Your parents signed it. Why? The breath I didn't know I was holding escaped as a soft tremble. I was removed from the trust. No one told me. There was another pause, but this one was different, weighted. I'm sorry to tell you this, he said carefully, but the trust was amended in 2021. I only know because I handled the notarization. It was signed while you were in the hospital, after the accident. Everything slowed. The room felt crooked. You mean, they changed it while I was recovering? I remember you weren't present. I thought it odd, but I was told you'd agreed beforehand. I hadn't. I never did. After we hung up, I sat still, for 10 minutes. Then I walked to the kitchen. The linoleum bit into my knees as I sank to the floor, back against the cabinet. My fingers shook, not from anger, but from something deeper, something colder. I remembered that hospital room, white, humming, impersonal. No visitors, not even my mother. Just a single card from Nora taped to the table. At the time, they'd said they were managing family finances and couldn't get away. I had believed them, but now I knew. I didn't cry for the money. I cried because I had trusted, because I had loved them enough to forgive again and again, hoping this time they'd meet me halfway. I cried because apparently I had never been in the will, just in the way. The sun had shifted low by the time I stood, my legs stiff, heart hollow. I opened my phone and typed, I've seen the amendment. I stared at Celine's name, thumb hovering over the send button. The typing bubble flickered once, then vanished. I waited. Nothing. Then I hit delete. They don't get to ghost me anymore, I whispered to the air, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like I wasn't the one disappearing. The drive over felt longer than it used to. Maybe it was the silence in the car, or maybe it was me calculating every word I needed to say. I had driven that route for birthdays, holidays, doctor appointments, but today, I wasn't arriving as the youngest daughter trying to smooth things over. I was arriving as someone they had underestimated. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a minute, watching the curtains shift in the front window. They'd seen me. My outfit was plain, no jewelry, no softness, just a navy blouse and slacks. The folder in my bag weighed heavier than it should have. I stepped out and walked slowly up the steps. My mother opened the door, her face a careful mix of surprise and neutrality. "Kaya," she said, like I'd stopped by to return a casserole dish. Celine appeared behind her, holding a coffee cup, already mid-sip. "Look who's here," she said too brightly. I didn't greet them. I didn't step inside yet. I looked at them both, two women who had spent years managing appearances like it was a job. Then I walked in. "Coffee?" my father asked from the kitchen, not looking up from his phone. "No," I replied, placing my bag down on the table. "I'm not here for tea. I'm here to return the favor. You erased me. I'm putting myself back in." Celine chuckled under her breath. "Kaya, really? You're still hung up on this?" I pulled out the folder and handed it across the table. "You can start with this." She took it, flipped open the first page, then scoffed. "This again? You always overreact." I didn't blink. "You removed me from the trust while I was recovering from surgery. You took a property I helped pay for and rewrote the history to suit yourselves." My mother sat down, lips pressed tight. My father rubbed his forehead but still said nothing. Silence had always been his favorite language. "You didn't just forget me," I continued, keeping my voice even. "You planned it, while I was unconscious, while I had IVs in my arms." Celine looked up from the packet, her tone sharp. "You were barely responsive. We made the decision for the good of the family. You were not stable." "No," I said, standing. "You were unstable. You couldn't stand the idea that I might deserve something permanent." I laid the last document on the table, a notarized letter bearing my name, dated, signed. "My lawyer will be in touch. We're beginning formal mediation. I'm not asking you anymore." Celine looked like she wanted to argue. My father finally opened his mouth, then closed it again. I turned, grabbed my bag, and walked out. No one followed. The drive back was quiet, but different this time. Not the kind of silence that screamed rejection, just the kind that came when you finally stopped expecting a sound that would never come. At home, I slid my shoes off and walked into my living room. The air felt still but lighter. I placed my bag gently on the counter, stared at the window as sunlight dimmed into evening. Then, softly, to no one in particular, I whispered, "I'm not afraid of being alone anymore." I didn't expect silence to feel heavier than confrontation, but it did. When I opened the envelope that Thursday morning, the official header was the first thing that struck me. A law firm I'd never heard of, embossed in gold. My name sat beneath the subject line in bold, unblinking letters. I skimmed, hoping it was some mistake, but it wasn't. Celine had filed a countersuit. She'd claimed I had a history of emotional instability, making me unfit to participate in financial matters concerning family estate distribution. There were vague references to therapy, a mention of recorded mental distress following a vehicular incident. No mention, of course, of the hospital visit she never made. I stood in the center of my kitchen, holding the letter like it was something radioactive. My breath was short, shallow. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stared until my hand gave up and let it fall to the floor. For 10 minutes, I sat at the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, blinking against a light no one else could see. Later that afternoon, an old message blinked into my inbox from Harmony Commons, the nonprofit I used to volunteer for years ago, before all of this swallowed my life whole. A panel, Thursday afternoon. Topic, Invisible Work, the Unseen Labor of Women. They'd remembered me, asked if I could speak again, like I had that one time 5 years ago when we fundraised for single moms. I almost declined, but instead I wrote back, "I'll be there." By 3 p.m., I stood backstage in a modest conference room in Minneapolis. Rows of chairs, a simple podium, lukewarm coffee in paper cups. Nothing dramatic. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear of speaking, but from what I was choosing not to say. They called my name. I stepped forward. "Hi, I'm Kaya Carver, artist, daughter, and for most of my life, someone who tried very hard not to be a burden." I saw nods. Older women, a few college students. A man in the back folded his arms, watching closely. I used to think that being easy meant I'd be safe, that if I didn't complain, if I didn't challenge anything, I'd be kept. I looked down for a moment, then back at the room. But the truth is, being invisible is not the same as being loved. The room was silent. Then, heels, sharp, deliberate, approaching the mic. "Hi," a voice said sweetly behind me. "I'm Celine, her sister. I just wanted to offer some context." Gasps. A few heads turned. I didn't. "She's been under a lot of stress," Celine continued. "After her accident, we were all worried. I'm not saying she's unstable, just that it's complicated." I kept my eyes forward. My grip on the mic tightened, but I let her speak. "You know," she added with a too-perfect smile, "we all want what's best for the family, but sometimes memories don't match reality, especially when emotions run high." I turned slowly toward her, waited for her to finish. Then, softly, "My sister's right." She smiled. "I did have a breakdown." Her smile faltered. "And do you know why? Because I spent 28 years being edited out of my own life." I reached into my folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is an excerpt from my diary. My father found it. And for the first time in 28 years, he cried." I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. Instead, I folded it in half and looked out across the room. Some of us spend our whole lives shrinking, hoping that if we're small enough, polite enough, quiet enough, we'll finally be welcomed to the table. But some tables were never set for us to begin with. I tucked the page back into the folder. The room didn't applaud immediately. It was too quiet. Then, from the far left, a slow clap, followed by another. And somewhere in the middle, a woman whispered loud enough for all of us to hear, "She said what we've all been too scared to." The applause had faded, but its echo followed me for days. I didn't expect it to. I thought I'd walk off that stage and dissolve back into the quiet like always. But Monday morning proved me wrong. My inbox was full. Strangers, former classmates, even a professor I hadn't heard from in over a decade. Most just said thank you. A few said they'd cried. One line stuck with me. "You made me feel less alone." Buried beneath them was an unexpected name, Arthur LaRue, my father's longtime attorney. The subject line read, "Something your father wanted you to have." The email was short. "He tried to speak with you before his bypass last year, said there were things he never said right. I have a document he left behind. If you're willing, I think it's time." I sat still for a long time, hands hovering above my keyboard. Then I replied, "Thursday, 10 a.m. That Thursday, the sky was overcast. Thick clouds hung low as if bracing the city for something. I walked into Arthur's office, a quiet suite downtown, the kind that still had wood paneling and a receptionist who offered peppermint tea. He didn't say much, just nodded and slid a thick envelope across the desk. His eyes held something softer than sympathy. Maybe guilt, maybe relief. I opened it. It was an addendum to my father's will, dated 11 months ago. And at the top, in handwriting that had once signed all my report cards, to Kaya, because I finally saw who really kept this family upright. There was more, legal acknowledgments, trustee amendments, even a full reinstatement of my co-ownership in the Lake Eden property. But that single line eclipsed everything. I didn't cry. I exhaled so deeply it startled Arthur. For the first time in years, I felt something close to equilibrium. Friday morning, I drove to my parents' house, no folder tucked under my arm this time, just a sealed envelope and my own steady hands. When my mother opened the door, her face betrayed more confusion than concern. "Kaya, what are you—" "I'm not here for a fight," I said softly. "Just wanted you to know. The truth wasn't lost. You just refused to read it." I placed the envelope in her hand. Through the seal, they could both see his handwriting. I met my father's eyes for just a second before I turned away. Their silence followed me down the steps and halfway to the sidewalk. Then, "Kaya." I turned. My father was on the porch, collapsed into the bench. His shoulders shook. In his lap, the diary, pages loose, spine cracked. His thumb rested under the line that began, "I was 9 the first time I felt like extra luggage." He was crying, deep, guttural sobs that came from somewhere buried under decades of denial. Inside, I could see my mother sitting in the hallway, her arms crossed, but her frame trembling. I didn't go back. Instead, I stepped into my car, closed the door gently, and let the silence cradle me. It wasn't justice, but it was acknowledgement. A voice came up from somewhere inside me, quiet but firm. It took 28 years, a diary and a collapse, but they finally read what I never had the heart to say out loud. That night, back in my apartment, I stood by the window with a cup of tea when my phone buzzed. A message. "I hope you're happy. You broke them. Celine." I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered for a second. Then I hit delete. No hesitation, no blinking. I didn't respond to Celine's message. I didn't need to. 3 weeks later, the wind off Lake Eden carried the kind of calm I used to think belonged to other people. People with simpler families, softer memories. Now, I was learning that peace isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose to build. The cabin my aunt left me was small, but it held everything I needed: space, quiet, and no expectations. I painted the walls a soft clay color, something that felt rooted. I moved slowly. No rush, no performance, just presence. There's one photo on the shelf above the fireplace. It's not of any reunion or celebration. It's of me at 8 years old, holding a red notebook, with marker smudges on my cheeks and a ribbon in my hair. She didn't know much yet, but she already knew how to carry things quietly. Beside it, I framed a torn diary page, the one that used to make me cry, the one they used to ignore. Now it sits beneath glass, not because it hurt me, but because it proved I existed. A few nights ago, I pulled out one last unsent letter. I had written it months ago, after that hospital stay they barely showed up for. It started with, "I forgive you," and ended with a sentence that had haunted me for too long. I just wanted to be enough. I read it twice, then took it outside to the fire pit. The paper curled quickly, turned black at the edges, then folded into ash. I watched it disappear into the wind. No tears, no bitterness, just release. Because sometimes the apology never comes, and sometimes silence is the apology. On Thursday, while cleaning the screened porch, I found something wedged under a floorboard, an old red ribbon, the same kind that once bound my childhood journals. I held it for a moment, thumbed the frayed edges, and smiled. That afternoon, I wrapped it around a new notebook. Blank pages, clean slate. I wasn't starting over. I was starting forward. By Friday, I was standing in front of a semicircle of teenagers at the local community center. My first creative writing class. The room smelled like dry erase markers and possibility. A girl named Lily, no older than 15, raised her hand hesitantly. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked. I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I finally did. "Not always," I said. "But it stops defining you." She nodded, and I saw something shift behind her eyes, a tiny breath of belief. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the chain break, not just for me, but maybe for her too. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with a mug of cinnamon tea and my notebook resting on my knees. The lake shimmered, and birdsong faded into the hum of dusk. I thought about how long I had tried to be enough, how long I'd been waiting for someone to say, "You mattered." Now I knew. I had been right to begin with. In a voice just above a whisper, I said it out loud, as if the trees needed to hear it too. My family broke me, but I rebuilt, not to prove them wrong, but to remember I was right to begin with. And if you've lived something like this, if your silence has ever been mistaken for weakness, tell me in the comments. I read everyone.